So the Bible says that the United States will stand with Israel and protect her throughout the end time. Now we're into the President Joe Biden administration, right? And you know, like I say, things could go awry really quick, and it looks like they are on many fronts. But as far as Israel is concerned, I know some things are going to change because obviously President Trump and President Biden, two different individuals when it comes to Israel, but the Bible says that we will stand with and protect Israel throughout the end time. Well, the Jerusalem Post has reported that why does the U.S. Central Command now include Israel? This happened as President Trump was on his way out the door, that he added Israel to the U.S. Central Command. And so what happened? Well, the U.S. Central Command has just announced that its area of responsibility has been redrawn to include Israel, and that it's going to strengthen the U.S. military posture in the Middle East and improve U.S.-Israel defense relations. And this is still continuing under the Biden administration. From the U.S. Central Command's inception, its area of responsibility was the greater Middle East, but did not include Israel. Israel was assigned to the U.S. European Command. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? And the rationale for this strategic gerrymander really was concern that Arab states might cooperate less if the Central Command officers were in regular contact with Israel. But under the Abraham Accords, the Middle East is changing. Arab officials from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and elsewhere are now openly talk of Israel as a strategic partner in opposing the Iranian aggression and Islamic State and other Islamist extremist groups there, and that Israel's working together with their Arab neighbors now. So whether or not it has ever made sense, the idea that Israel must remain out of Central Command is now clearly outdated. And the report, therefore, suggests redrawing the Central Command's area of responsibility to include Israel. And remember what the prophecies say, that the United States will protect Israel in the end time. So Central Command has always tended to be focused on Arab equities rather than on Israel's, and more on Pakistan's than India's. They're working across in the Middle East region there. Meanwhile, the Indo-Pacific Command is more solicitous of India and so on. So they got different commands going on, but now Central Command, Israel's included in that. Central Command planners should take full advantage of America's military and intelligent relationships with Israel. It was neither necessary, advantageous, nor historically justified to exclude Israel from efforts by the Central Command to bolster its military plans through regional cooperation. So Israel's inclusion in the Central Command's area of responsibility adds to the ability of both states to respond effectively in a crisis, the United States and Israel. And moreover, this change now aligns maritime security equities and enables direct coordination on the sea lanes and at strategic choke points of the Red Sea that are vital to Israeli security and prosperity. So moving Israel into Central Command's area of responsibility will facilitate military cooperation with Israel, and it might promote more contact and cooperation now that Israel's involved, and many other Arab states that want to get involved with the Abraham Accords. So you can see how the Middle East right here is really changing. And now Israel has been added to Central Command, and the United States and Israel and these Arab nations can really work in defense from and put up a defensive front from Iran. And Iran knows this. So a very important new geopolitical situation forming in the Middle East. And also the Jerusalem Post, they reported that under the Biden administration, that President Joe Biden has sent a B-52 bomber over the Persian Gulf in a first message to Iran. And so in a clear deterrent action against Iran, yesterday, a United States Air Force Base B-52 Stratofortress bomber flew over the Gulf before the plane was spotted in Saudi airspace heading back to its base in the United States. It was the fourth mission on CENTCOM's area of operation in the last 2 months, and the first deployment of this heavy bomber since Joe Biden's inauguration. So 3 of them were sent over during the Trump administration, and now that Joe Biden has come in, they just did one yesterday. So it came on the same day that the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Aviv Kachavi, openly said that Israel was redrafting attack plans against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. And I can tell you right now, Israel, if you follow this at all, you know what I'm saying is true. Israel will go to war tomorrow morning if that's what's needed to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Israel will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon because Iran wants to destroy Israel. So they're never going to allow them to get a nuclear weapon. That could bring about the Sixth Trumpet War. It's very possible. Now, I know there are other scenarios and different things that could play out, but we know there's a World War III coming from the Euphrates River region, and Iran has pretty much been at war with the United States and Israel for the last, since 79. And so that's has never gone away, and it's never going to go away. So Israel is bound and determined, and the United States, to keep Iran in check. And so should they go bomb them and that bring in Russia and China, and you never know how it's all going to play out, but it really looks, a lot of people think that we might already be in World War III. It just hasn't escalated to the point where 1/3 of the world's population will be destroyed, according to the prophecies of the Bible. But as far as this B-52 flyover, according to the reports, the heavy bomber departed from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana on Tuesday on a nonstop flight across Jordan, across Saudi Arabia, and down the coastline near the United Arab Emirates and Qatar before turning around and returning to the United States. After the last deployment, U.S. Central Command said that the bomber was sent to the Gulf to underscore America's commitment to regional security and the ability to rapidly deploy to the region as needed. What's the prophecy say? That the United States will protect Israel throughout the end time. And we saw this B-52 be sent over there by the Biden administration. So the United States continues to deploy combat-ready capabilities into the U.S. Central Command, where Israel's added into now, into the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility to deter any potential adversary and make clear that we are ready and able to respond to any aggression directed at Americans or our interest. That's what General Frank McKenzie, he's the commander of the U.S. Central Command, said. And McKenzie's in Israel and has been for a few days now. And at the time, he said that we do not seek conflict, but no one should underestimate our ability to defend our forces and to act decisively in response to any attack. So it's pretty awesome that Israel's now under Central Command right there in the Middle East. Now, I also wanted to bring you up to date on the peace plan situation in the Middle East, because obviously that's one of the next prophecies to occur on God's prophetic timeline. So a lot of these things, I mean, these prophecies are, all of them are just about 2,000 years old or older. And we're watching them come to pass in intricate detail, just one right after another. And a lot of them, they're just converging at the same time. So Israel National News reported that Biden declared the Trump peace plan dead. and buried. A lot of people have been asking me about that. Hey, what about President Trump's peace plan? Where are we at with that? Well, it appears that because President Trump and President Joe Biden's plan are so different that Joe Biden has pretty much put that to bed. Now, one of the main differences with President Trump's plan and a potential Joe Biden mindset is the annexation of the West Bank. President Trump, his plan allowed for a Palestinian Arab state in Gaza and about 70% of the West Bank, and plus an area currently within Israel's sovereign borders, and it allowed Israel to be in control of the Jordan Valley, which is, they need that for a defensible border. And it was, Israel's sovereignty was being extended in the remaining 30% of the West Bank. While President Joe Biden, his presidency is going to erase many of the gains the Israeli right made over the last 4 years with regard to Israel's sovereignty over Area C, or where a lot of these settlements are, of the West Bank, and reintroduce the concept of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on pre-67 borders. So, excuse me, the 1967 borders, after the armistice agreement in 1949, after the War of Independence, it was from that area to all the way to 1967. They had the borders that made up the West Bank. They had the 67 borders. Well, then in 1967, in the 6 Days War, Israel conquered all that and pushed Jordan back across the Jordan Valley. And that's how they got Israel has control of the West Bank now. But Joe Biden believes that they should go back to the pre-67 borders. Israel's not going to do that. And many people have questioned why the prophesied agreement must be between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Well, one of the main, the Bible prophesies that, but one of the main reasons, if you look at the geopolitical situation in the Middle East right now with Israel and the Palestinians are the ones vying for that land. When the United Nations partition plan was presented back in 1947, it was to the Arabs living in Palestine there and the Jews. Notice it wasn't between Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. It was the Arabs living there, which are the Palestinians, and they call themselves the Palestinians now, and the Jews. So the international community recognizes that that's the situation right there. The Palestinians are the ones that are vying for the West Bank. It's not the United Arab Emirates. They're not vying for the West Bank. The Saudi Arabia is not vying for the West Bank. It's the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's where the battle is. That's what's going to be the peace agreement. Once those two sign an agreement, that starts the final 7 years between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
As soon as you say end time, they say, whoa, the end of the world. When's it going to be? And you can see this mask of fear. I'm not telling you the time is coming. I'm telling you, you live in it right now. Daniel chapter number 7, verse number 4. The first beast was like a lion. We have the evil used continually to depict the United States of America. You see it on governmental We are the generation for which these that you will not miss one segment of understanding end time, because I've had many people tell me it's changed their life forever. Many of the major prophecies of the Bible are given to us 2, 3, some of them as high as 4 or 5 times. There is not any chance it's not going to happen, because it's in your Bible, it's prophesied, and the prophecies always coming back.
So let me cover just a little bit more of that, because I know many people, like I say, are asking, why does it, with all this Abraham Accords happening and everything, why does the agreement have to be the one signed between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Well, the Bible foretells a Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement that will mark the beginning of the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon and the physical return of Jesus Christ to the earth. Daniel 9:27 prophesies that the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many for a final 7-year period. Joe Biden possibly could be involved in that, but it's going to be a political leader from Europe that will be the Antichrist. Joe Biden's from the United States. Even though he is a globalist, Joe Biden can't be the Antichrist. I know we'll get that question eventually. But it's going to be a leader from Europe. You understand that the quartet that the United States, Europe, Russia, and the United Nations is included in, that could be, they could go with the quartet, and maybe they get the situation done right there. But it's going to be the one that starts the final 7 years, as long as it has all the characteristics, will be between Israel and the Palestinians. Daniel 9:27, the Bible says, and he, the Antichrist, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, or a week of years, a 7-year period. And in the midst of the week, 3.5 years in, the Antichrist will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So the accord will be a confirmation of God's covenant with Abraham, that Israel would always have a homeland in the promised land back in Genesis 15:18. The scriptures prophesy that there will be 5 things, 5 characteristics that will be contained in the prophesied Palestinian-Israeli peace plan that will trigger the final 7 years. 2 of those characteristics are, there's going to be a Palestinian state in Judea. Think about what's going on in the news. You understand the Palestinians are the ones that are wanting a two-state solution. You don't see Egypt saying, hey, we need a two-state solution and Egypt wants to move in there. That's not what's going on. It's the Palestinians. The international community recognizes that. The United States, Russia, Europe, everybody recognizes it's between Israel and the Palestinians. So in Matthew 24, verse 15, 16, and then down through 21, Jesus said, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, remember Daniel 9:27, when you see that abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, Jesus mentioned Daniel in talking about the same thing. He said, when you see that stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea, or the modern-day West Bank, flee into the mountains. Well, that's not going to be the Palestinians. That's going to be the Jews that are living out there, the settlers. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. This is a New Testament prophecy. A lot of people are wondering why we're going to do the door-knocking campaign. This is why. We're going to be warning those people, hey, you've got to leave. Here's what's happening. We're going to have the magazine will already have been sent out at that point. We've got a huge plan. It's all going to play out, and it's going to be awesome. And still a fulfillment, an ongoing fulfillment of Ezekiel 37. God said, I will bring you back from all over the world. and put you in the hills of Israel, and I will bless you, and I will put my spirit into you, and I'm going to breathe the breath of life into your nostrils. Well, that's happening. That is happening right now. And God said, if you bless Israel, I'll bless you. If you curse Israel, I'm going to curse you. That's the way it's going to be. And so we bless Israel every chance we get. We love Israel. And I want to see Israel come fully back, all the way back to the Lord before this is all over with. And so, and I'll be talking about this more. I'm going to do one on another Jewish Holocaust and a lot of different things. So Jesus foretold this event called the abomination of desolation. And other passages clearly say that this event will happen 3.5 years prior to or 3.5 years after this Palestinian-Israeli agreement is signed. And Jesus warned that Jews who are living in Judea, this is a 2,000-year-old prophecy, but Jesus knew exactly what would happen. He said there are going to be Jews that are living out there in Judea that they will have to flee for their lives. So Judea will obviously be under enemy control, right? If it's in Israel proper, they're not going to have to worry about it. But if they're going to be out there, then that's when they're going to have to flee for their lives. So under the future agreement, Jews are going to be able to stay out in that Palestinian state. Again, that's Matthew 24, 15, and 16. The passage clearly says that there will be Jews living in Judea at the time of the abomination of desolation. And like I said, that's going to occur 3.5 years after the abomination, after the signing of the Israeli peace agreement, and 3.5 years prior to the second coming in the Battle of Armageddon. So there will be a two-state solution included in the future peace agreement, but there will never truly be peace. Let me explain why. I wanted to give you this update because you see the Biden administration, now the Trump administration, the Palestinians basically ended all negotiations with them because the Trump administration recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved our embassy there, and they said, well, you guys aren't going to be a good peace negotiator, so we're done with you. They cut off all ties. So President Trump said, okay, we'll cut off our funding. We'll move the place where you guys are, your office in Washington, D.C., we're going to close that down. Not going to mess with you. That's how Trump responded. Well, of course, the Joe Biden administration comes in, and now they're going to cozy right back up with the Palestinians. They're going to reinstate the funding for them, and they're going to reopen their office in Washington. And the Gatestone Institute, they wrote a great article. They said the Palestinian plan to dupe the Biden administration. So 1 week after he entered, this is Mahmoud Abbas, he entered the 17th year of a 4-year term. Think about that. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas finally announced new parliamentary and presidential elections scheduled to take place in May and July of 2021. His announcement was carefully timed to coincide with the inauguration of President Joe Biden and in response to the immense pressure from the European Union. Mahmoud Abbas announced, which many Palestinians take as seriously as they would take if somebody saw a UFO, is part of his attempt to curry favor with the Biden administration and the EU. But there's all an ulterior motive. There's only one word to describe Abbas's announcement: deception. The proposed Palestinian elections are part of a scheme designed to deceive the international community, specifically the U.S. and the EU, into believing that the Palestinians are serious about implementing major reforms, ending financial and administrative corruption, and engaging in other peace process with Israel. They really don't want peace. Abbas, who, like I said, boycotted President Trump's administration since December of 2017, is hoping the Biden administration will resume financial aid to the Palestinians and that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees, or UNRWA, and to reopen the PLO diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C., and cancel the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. As of right now, Joe Biden has said that he's not going to do that. But, I mean, that could change tomorrow, you know. And so Abbas did not call for elections because he suddenly believes in this, in democracy and pluralism, or because he wants to pave the way for new and young leaders to rise to power. No. Abbas did not call for elections because he wants to give the Palestinians the opportunity to elect new leaders through a free and fair electoral process. Not only does Abbas have no plans to depart from the political scene anytime in the near future, he has even said that he's considering running in the presidential election himself if and when it takes place on July 31. So there is one reason, and one reason only, why Abbas is now talking about holding general elections. It's to continue milking the cash cow that he has in the form of America and the European governments, and he wants the money to ensure that he continued a dictatorial rule over the Palestinians. He knows that without the money from the U.S. and the EU, that his regime could not survive one day. And he also knows that without Israel's security presence in the West Bank, Hamas, which controls Gaza, and his political enemies would easily remove him from power. So Abbas is trying to show the Biden administration and the Europeans that he is not an autocrat or an illegitimate leader whose tenure really ended back in January of 2009. And also, he would really like to make sure that he retains control in Ramallah, which is out in the West Bank. And when you look at what's happening here, they don't really want peace in the Middle East. Abbas would like to liberate Israel of the Jewish entity. And so what's happening in the future, the Joe Biden administration is cozying up to the Palestinians now, and he wants a two-state solution. And there will be Jews that remain out there. Netanyahu has said we would leave the Jews out there under a Palestinian state. And that's exactly what Jesus prophesied would happen back in Matthew chapter 24, that there would be Jews. When you see the abomination of desolation occur 3.5 years prior to my second coming, let those which be in Judea, they will have to flee. And so we're seeing the geopolitical situation that it will be very ripe for a peace agreement to get signed in the near future, and it's going to be the geopolitical situation just like Jesus said it would be 2,000 years ago in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 all the way down through 21.